But I thank Joe for filling in. And then he's preaching this weekend. It's his turn to teach. So I'm done here. You should have an outline going around. We are officially jumping into Isaiah 13. And we're going to be looking at all the way to 27. Those chapters. Obviously, we probably won't get through all of that tonight. But if someone would catch me up on the book of Isaiah, or anything that you can think of or remember about the book so far, kind of some of its themes, what Isaiah's been talking about, anything. Even if you say it's found in the book in the Old Testament, I'll be grasping for straws, anything over here. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of predictive prophecy, and not visions as much as you would see like in the book of Revelation, where it's, horses and dragons, Ezekiel, we'll get to some of that. But yeah, there's a lot of judgment, a lot of looking forward to judgment and hope. It's kind of been the major theme for the first 12 chapters so far. And Assyria and Israel had, what have they done? The 10 northern tribes in Assyria, they've worked together, coming after Judah, right? But unfortunately, what does that do for Israel? It's their downfall, right? God says, because you have worked against your own people, right? God is going to use the same people you paired up with, teamed up with. They're eventually going to be your captors, okay? But don't worry. What? Don't worry. Just because you're going into captivity, there's a remnant, right? We're going to bring you back. We got the child-born illustrations, right? There's going to be this child who is going to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders and kind of deliver Israel from Assyria. Any other things you guys can remember? This is what the Lord says. So Isaiah uses that phrase over and over and over again. Isaiah is not looking at history and analyzing history and trying to figure out, well, if you keep going this way, this is your most this is where you're heading. Well, kind of like what we would have to do, right? You keep living this lifestyle, there's a very good chance you're going to end up where? Here, right? Isaiah is saying, no, the Lord showed me, or the Lord told me, this is what's going to happen. And now, we kind of mentioned this last week. Who is Isaiah writing this to again? Judah, the two southern tribes. Well, why should Judah be so concerned, at least in the first 12 chapters, about what's happening to, right now, their enemy? Right? They should be a little, that's what I'm talking about. They should be a little happy, right? Happy that God is going to, relieve the pressure and that their enemies, whether they are their brethren or not, are going to go into captivity. Carolyn?
Okay, they should be aware that they're going to fall into this same thing.
Yeah.
They are just going along, think they're okay, just like Israel did, but they are not doing everything they're supposed to do. Maybe a little bit better than the other, but they're heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah, Judah is 150 years behind Israel. All right? They're heading in that same direction. The same decisions Israel was making to lead them here are the same decisions Judah is currently bringing into their nation, and therefore Isaiah is warning them about the possible downfall. Okay, so we just kind of getting you guys somewhat caught up, getting your mind back into the book of Isaiah. Last week we looked a little bit at Isaiah chapter 13, so if you want to go ahead and turn your Bibles there. We're talking about the judgment of Babylon. So he's all of a sudden, he's jumping forward 200, 300 years. okay, about the judgment of Babylon. Because Babylon, not only do they have to rise to power, conquer Israel, have the 70 years of captivity, then it will be the Medes and Persians. So we're well almost 250 years before all these things are happening that Isaiah is saying Babylon's going to fall. And the really neat thing about this, at least from my perspective, if Isaiah can predict the downfall of Assyria, even though right now they are the superpower, there is nobody who can threaten them. Babylon's still just the Chaldeans, right? They own their little section over off north of the Dead Sea. I almost said Dead Sea Scrolls. Over north of the Dead Seas, they're nothing right now. They're nothing right now. But if he can predict that Assyria will fall, when Babylon comes along, and remember, we looked at some of these next week, or last week, that these minor prophets are going to start quoting from Isaiah. Remember when God said? Remember when God said? And start using some of that same language. History has proven that God predicted the fall of Assyria, which meant hope for Israel. What is that going to do for Judah when they go into captivity? Hope for them as well, right? At least it should. And Ezekiel has to remind them, but Ezekiel's reminders are much more of theatrical. I think Martha could probably write some of those. She's not here, but she would be here. She's a theater writer. But, basically he acts out all of the things that Israel's going to be going through. Randy, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think like at least the first 19 chapters of Isaiah, that one, if we have to sum it up in one word, it's pride.
It's what? Pride. Okay. Yeah. And that's actually what we're going to be looking at with Babylon. Babylon's going to become the representative kind of all the nations. And Babylon is going to take on that name. Revelation's actually going to use it over and over and over again to represent whatever world power is in power, right? If they go the same trajectory as Babylon, they will end up like Babylon, right? And so Babylon becomes more thematic than it does necessarily speaking about Babylon all of the time. Now, one of the things we looked at last week, let's go over to verse 19 of Isaiah 13. Oh, I forgot to say something. Say a prayer tonight. My brother and daughter-in-law, or my daughter-in-law, scratch that. My sister-in-law, she has the high blood pressure, PAM, whatever it's called, and they are inducing her tonight. So they're supposed to wait 5 weeks, and so my brother might be a dad tonight. So just keep that in prayers as you say your prayers tonight. Moving back to Isaiah 13:19. Look at we'll start in verse 17. It says, "Behold, I'm stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them." And so we have this interesting terminology, because one of the proofs that people try to use against believing in God is that God always kills whom? Who is he always killing? Innocent women and children. Okay? And, I'm not here to defend all of God's actions. He does that for himself. But whenever we come to these points in history where it starts talking about how these people are going to have no mercy, right, on the women, no mercy on the children, and then compares them to Sodom and Gomorrah, what do we know about Sodom and Gomorrah and their destruction? What did Abraham try to go find? If I find one righteous man, one righteous person, will you save this city? And Abraham could not find it. Right? So I know sometimes we can't think of a world. I think we're getting to a place where we may be able to see like that's a plausibility, a world where even women and children are not as innocent as we would claim. If you work in the school systems at all, you may see that kids today, I wouldn't even say it's always their fault, but what kind of environments are they raised in? They're raised in a very sinful and wicked environment. A lot of times at a very young age, I heard kids saying stuff, I'm like, man, my mom would whoop me. She would absolutely kill me. 5 years old. And then I met the dad, and this kid started saying it from the dad. I was like, oh, I can't wait. The dad said nothing. Like, your 5-year-old's popping off F-bombs and all this stuff. And the dad acts as if it's just nothing. And then, we're in the process, I won't share, Ben is about to do an all-star tournament. And all the kids get to pick an entry song. So all these kids are picking entry songs. These kids are 8 years old. Never heard of these songs, so I start looking some of them up. I'm going to have to bring earplugs while these songs are being played. Nasty stuff it's talking about too. And I'm thinking 8 years old, and their parents are like, yeah, and they're laughing about it in our group chat. I just think where we're at today, I would still say there is good in our society. And I can see the evidence of God being brought out of our society. I couldn't imagine in 50 years if we keep going, right, what it could look like. And then we think, well, they're innocent women and children. Are they? Maybe not, right? So we got to keep these things in mind. And when God comes and brings judgment, he usually waits a long time, doesn't he? He usually waits a long time. Sometimes the people of God have to suffer a little longer or not get what God promised because, hey, I'm not going to bring judgment on people who don't deserve it. Same thing with the Promised Land, right? It was over 400 years before they could go into the Promised Land because the sins of the Amorites were not yet full, right? Which the Amorites, whose descendants are they? Same with the Moabites. Lot, right? Those are Lot's descendants. And Lot, remember, took the Promised Land, right? When they split ways, he gave Lot the first choice, and he basically chose the Promised Land to go into. But anyway, so these will be like Sodom and Gomorrah. God's going to destroy them. It says, it will never be inhabited or lived in for all the generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell. Their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers. Jackal in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So you've got this, especially this picture of night and all these night creatures that come out. I don't know if you've ever been out in the woods really late at night and it's really dark. Do those noises settle you and cool you? You can go to sleep listening to all these noises? No, they kind of freak you out, don't they? They kind of scare you, right? You start hearing jackals, right? You start hearing hyenas, right? I don't want to be out in the woods with them. And what we're seeing is the opposite of what God made the promise back in chapter 11, that the lion will lay down with the lamb. The vipers, right, den, kids will be able to play in, and they won't get bitten. So this judgment upon the world in Babylon is going to be the opposite of what the Eden paradise looks like. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because when we get into chapter 24 through 27, you're going to see kind of a comparative of these two cities. There's the cities of men and how they live and behave, and there's the cities of God and how they live and they behave. Okay? And so just keep Babylon in the back of your mind. So we kind of read some of that stuff, but someone read Isaiah 14, 1 and 2, and then read verse 32 of Isaiah 14, the same person. In the midst of all this Babylon judgment talk, here's what we're going to see.
All right, Isaiah 14, 1 and 2, and then 32.
Yep.
For the Lord will have mercy.
Battery's dying. We have the other one. Chad, can we get a new set of batteries? Or Hayden, got it?
Rick was way too quick to give this to me.
Take it away.
For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, and strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. Verse 32. What shall one then answer the messengers of the nation, that the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it?
Okay. So what do we constantly see, even in the midst of all this universal blacking out the sun, right? This chaotic world that God is going to throw the evil and wicked people into. What is God going to do for his own people in the midst of all that? Huh? What does it say? You can read it just like I can. Yeah, he's going to choose Israel, right? But this idea of compassion, mercy, okay? Now, it's interesting. Right now, currently, while Isaiah is prophesying against Jacob, do they deserve any kind of mercy or compassion? I mean, why is he writing the book? Right? He's writing the book because they are currently in a place where they are full of sin and wickedness and idolatry, and yet God is looking forward to a time when he will be able to show them mercy and compassion. And one of the big things that we want to take away, especially from the book of Isaiah, God is not looking to call people out who are the best, the most righteous, the most well-behaved, the most this, the most that. What you see in Isaiah is nobody's like that. But it's the people who recognize, and that's what we're going to see when we get to like chapter 26 and 27, those who finally will humble themselves and stop trusting in themselves and in the earthly ways, and they begin to trust in the Lord. You see, you don't become good and good people trust in the Lord. It's really what happens, and especially, I mean, like when we go to preach the gospel, a lot of times, excuse me, you're preaching to people, and what you're trying to get them to understand is that they are not good, right? They are not good. They have sinned, and sin has consequences. And yet, they can get rid of that sin by trusting in God. And God can wipe away those sins. God can wash them away. God can cleanse you. And once you begin to trust in God, you can begin to then do what? Be good and be righteous. I mean, it's the whole concept in Romans 6, right? Once you're a slave to sin, and once you're free from being a slave to sin, now you can become a bondservant of righteousness. And so that's what I want you to understand in the book of Isaiah. When God is even looking for the remnant, he's not looking for people who are just out there stellar people. He's looking at people who will finally acknowledge that they're not stellar people, that they're not righteous people, they're not good alone. And whenever they begin to do things like the world, and you're going to see this over and over and over again, kind of going all the way back when they first started asking for a king, that was kind of what's so wrong with asking for a king like the nations? It's not necessarily that it's wrong, it's that you start putting your trust in the processes, in the way the world processes things. You start putting your trust in worldly wisdom and thinking that because it's worked for this nation, right, that God's way is it's old, right? It's history. We now have a bigger people, a bigger nation. We've got more territory. We have more people than we've ever had. How are we ever going to be united if we don't have a king? Well, you do have one, right? You do have one. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. And what tends to happen, again, with every single nation that begins to trust in itself rather than in God. Let's look at, I'm going to read chapter 14 verses 3, and I'm going to read all the way to verse 15. I want you just to listen. And it's interesting, this is going to become a taunt. And this taunt is a taunt that God is saying that Jacob will one day say against Babylon, which is interesting. Because when you read Psalm 137, all the way when Babylon was bringing captives all the way back to, from Jerusalem all the way back to Babylon, guess what they taunted them with? Oh, sing your songs of Zion. Sing your songs of salvation. They taunted them. Like, where's your God now? Where's your Zion now? Where's your holy hill now? You're famous for your songs. They were, by the way, right? You know, the amount of songs they sang and for the temple, that wasn't widespread, okay? And so they had and there was a lot of theology in their songs. There was a lot of what they believed in their songs. And the taunt is going to be reversed. Right? They taunted you, and now here's what your taunt's going to be. Look at verse 3. It says, when the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil in the hard service with which you were made to serve. So you're going to go through some stuff. This salvation ain't going to be free. It's going to cost you 70 years. You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, the insolent fury ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers that struck the peoples in wrath with unceasing blows, that ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. The cypresses rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes up against us. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who are leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who are kings of the nations. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become weak as we. Isn't it interesting that every nation has watched the previous nation before them do what? Fall. And it's really interesting when you study history. 9 times out of 10, when a nation conquers one of the more powerful nations in the earth, they find weaknesses. And the weaknesses usually come in with division, sin. And when I mean sin, they start throwing parties instead of, right? And they have these mass parties, and they're parties you don't want to show up to, right? If you don't want to pluck your eyes out when you're done, right? I mean, and so they start maneuvering, and they start having, playing off the division and playing off the sin and playing off the idolatry. They start, splitting the nations. I mean, they go and conquer a nation, finding all of its weak points. And for the first 100 years of that new nation, they're doing pretty good. And what happens to that nation after about 100 years when you start studying history? What caused the previous nation to fall, they are now like, because now they're done warring, they're done conquering, they now get to sit back and look over their plunder and become very prideful and arrogant and begin to have those same parties, live those same lifestyles, commit those same sins, add those same gods, and they get destroyed. And so what we're seeing is that when Babylon's being destroyed, it says all the previous rulers and kingdoms and thrones cry out from Sheol saying, aha, you have become weak as we became weak. You fell into the same trap we fell into. And every nation knows it, which is kind of sad about Babylon, because Babylon had some people there, right? Daniel and his friends who were preaching the truth, who actually got them to acknowledge the God of Israel, right? Nebuchadnezzar, from what we have historically, ended worshiping and praising God. How did he die, by the way? Assassinated by the next guy. And the next guy, even when the Lord was writing his writing in the air with a hand, he wouldn't fear the Lord God. And what we're about to see is what comes after them. So all these nations end up going through the same. And so that kind of, I want to talk about that for a moment, because we look out in the world that we live in, and do you think God has stopped working the same way he's worked then? Do you think God has stopped punishing nations for sin? Punishing nations for their pride and arrogance? Right? God is going to take, and this is part of the Isaiah's message, is why was Israel not commissioned to conquer the whole world and to go out into the whole world and just subjugate every nation? God's going to take care of that. You know what they needed to be? They needed to be a nation united, a nation that followed the laws of God and commands of God and were a light to the other nations. And so when these other nations fell, they could look, why does this nation not going through the same process that we're going through? Why don't they fall when we fall? Why don't they have enemies like we have enemies? Who is protecting them? But unfortunately, oftentimes, Israel caused God's name to be what? Become what? Blasphemed, a byword, right? Because how are they any different than the other nations? And this is the main theme of the book Isaiah. You get to choose. What city do you want to be, Jerusalem? Like Babylon, or like the city that was set on a hill? Now, I know we're projecting a little bit further, and I'm not going to read all this. I've got you guys a lot of notes here. I'm going to read a couple things throughout, and I want to jump over. So, obviously, Babylon's going to be brought low. The next one is Assyria is going to be brought low. So, chapter 14, the big three, Babylon, Assyria, and Philistia. Why are those three mentioned first? Babylon, Assyria, and Philistia. Of all going down. They were the constant enemies of Israel. All three of them, in one way or another, were the ones that taunted Israel. They didn't just conquer, right? There are nations that come in and conquer, and when they conquer, they just kind of move on. Or they conquer just like they would do anyway. But these nations mocked God, taunted Israel's faith, taunted their religion, taunted their God, made fools of their God, made mockery of their God, right? You can even think of Goliath, right? Remember the David and Goliath story with the Philistines, right? And what does David say when Goliath is mocking God? What's he say? Who is this blasphemer, right? Who is this Philistine? Who does he think he is, right? And he goes and kills him with a stone. So we've got them, but I want to see, and I just want to show you something, that God is not proud of having to do this. God is not wanting to do this. Okay, so when we come over to the oracle concerning Moab, watch this. Look at chapter 16, verse 1. It says, "Send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Salah by the way of the desert to the mount of the daughter of Zion. Like fleeing birds, like a scattered nest, so are the daughters of Moab, are the fords of Arnon. Give counsel, grant justice, make your shade like night at the height of noon, shelter the outcast, do not reveal the fugitive." So this is the plea. Please, Moab, who is, once again, sort of related to Abraham, descendant of Lot, please do the right thing. Justice, mercy, compassion, protect the poor, right? That becomes the staple of every nation. If you want to see, as a nation good, how do they treat their poor? What's their justice system like, right? Do they show compassion and mercy? Do they shelter the sojourner? It says, "Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you, be a shelter to them from the destroyer. When the oppressor is no more and destruction has ceased, he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land." Watch. "Then a throne will be established in steadfast love and on it will sit in faithfulness in the tent of David, one who judges and seeks justice and is swift to do righteous. Moab is given the same promise that God gave Israel. There would be one who would come and sit on the throne of David, come from the family of David, the tent of David, and on this throne would be what? Righteousness and justice and mercy. And so he's inviting them that you can be a part of this too. And this is where we start making that transition in the book of Isaiah, of this call to the nations, that you don't have to be an Israelite to partake in the blessings and the promises of Israel, because there's coming a king who is going to rule over all of creation, all of this new world that God is building. But, look at verse 6. And I think this goes back to Randy's point. We have heard of the pride of Moab, how proud he is, of his arrogance, his pride, and his insolence. In his idle boasting, he is not right. Therefore, let Moab wail for Moab. Let everyone wail, mourn, utterly stricken for the raisin cakes of Kirhareseth. And I'm not going to read the rest because it's a bunch of other stuff. But what we're going to go on is as they're being destroyed and punished, there's someone at the ring doorbell, by the way, punished and destroyed, what is Israel supposed to be doing? Mourning, crying, right? And so this is what we're seeing. God's people going from taunting their enemies, right, with Babylon. Once they're destroyed, okay, we're over that. Now these other nations who are not Babylon, they still have their pride and arrogance. They're going to have to meet their doom. I want you to wail and have compassion for them. And then when the Moabites start to become sojourners because they've been kicked out of the land, what do I want you to do? I want you to take them in. Okay? And this is what's going to set apart the true faithful. They trusting in God. Why would you bring in a Moabite? You know of a famous Moabite? Ruth. All right, why would you trust her? Why would you bring her into your fold? I wonder.
For a historical question, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Did it get lost in the first captivity in Assyria? Did it get lost in the Babylonian captivity? And if so, or if not, did it, when the temple was rebuilt, was the Ark recovered? What do we know about the Ark?
Almost nothing.
Almost nothing. So when was it last used or seen?
One of its last times being seen was at the ransacking, I believe, of, it was in Solomon's, and so when he had it in the temple, right? And we know nothing was taken out of the temple until the coming of Babylon. So now we have no written history that the ark was there, but they went and did Passover, they went and did all these things, which the ark would have had to have been there for them to go through those processes. But most likely, once it was raided during the captivity of Babylon, it was probably never seen again. Kind of like what they did with everything else. What did they do with all the temple and everything? They stripped it for its gold. They stripped it for its material. And so there may be parts of the ark out there that people don't even know it is a part of the ark, but it's just been stripped down and taken apart. But it was never recovered. They never, from what we know, they never built a new one. But yeah, that's an archaeological part of. I don't get into that stuff because everybody thinks they found it. Everybody thinks there's a location where it's at. Was that the second bell? First bell? So on that note, making sure. Okay, sorry. On that note, I was shown an article probably 6 months ago at the FBI have come up with, or CIA, probably CIA, have come up with it's, like I said, there's somewhat weird stuff, come up with the way of people being able to go into trances and transporting their minds or spirits into other places. I'm sure you've heard of this idea. And so someone thinks they found the ark, and it's like 350 feet somewhere into the ground, somewhere over in like Turkey or something. And they've begun digging where this person thinks he's. So we'll see if they find it in that exact location, I guess I'm going to have to say that's somewhat legitimate or, whatever. But anyway, so no, I don't know where it's at. I don't know what has happened of it. But I do want to, I wanted to read Isaiah 24. I wanted to get there real quick. Do we have, 1 minute? So you guys can read all of 18, 19. All it is just Babylon, Cush, Egypt, Assyria, Philistia, Moab, and God's saying the same thing. They all are being persecuted because of their pride. Chapter 24 is what we're going to get into next week. But I want you to see we're going to switch from Babylon to this universal judgment. Okay, it's going to switch to this universal judgment. And so look at verse 1. It says, "Behold, the Lord will empty the earth." Right? He will empty the earth and make it desolate. He will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. It shall be as with the people, so with the priest, the slave, the master, as with the maid, as with the mistress, as with the buyer, the seller, the lender, the borrower, as with the creditor, and so with the debtor. Right? Everybody's become corrupt. Not just the lender, but also the borrower. Right? And you can think of ways that people can borrow money and not willing to pay back, right? So everybody's become corrupt. So justice has not worked anywhere, and it won't work anywhere. Right? It says, "The earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word." And I want you to think, do you think God's being literal in the actually emptying the earth, like there's just going to be completely desolate? God's going to remove everybody? Or are these figures of speech to talk about destruction and punishment and how God's going to do something so great that these people oftentimes, they're going to flee, they're going to hide, they're going to and what it's going to look like, what we're going to see is they're all going to flee to a city. They're all going to flee to a stronghold. And they think its walls will keep God out. Ask Jonah how far you can run from God. Right? And so as you read, I want you to read 24 through 29, getting ready for next week, and look at that idea of the lofty city versus the city that trusts in God. And we're gonna do some comparison hopefully next week. Okay? Thank you.